Because of why I search the deep through endless nights, no time to sleep. The call inside I can't deny. I'll find the light because of why.
Hey there. So, you've probably heard the term tax haven thrown around, and one name that always seems to pop up is the British Virgin Islands, or the BVI. But what's the real story there? Is it all just sunshine and beautiful beaches, or is something a lot more complicated going on with their finances? Let's break it down friend to friend. Okay, to get a sense of scale, let's start with the basics. The BVI is this small, gorgeous UK territory out in the Caribbean, and its population? It's about 33,000 people. You know, think of a really nice, sunny, small town. Now hold on, because here's where it gets kinda wild. While only 33,000 people actually live there, the BVI is home to more than 300,000 active, registered companies. Just let that sink in. That's almost 10 companies for every single person, man, woman, and child, living on the islands. So the big question is, how is that even possible? What are all those companies doing there? And that right there is the million-dollar question for today. But the answer, well, it's not a simple yes or no. It's really a story with two very different sides, a ton of data, and some pretty huge implications for the entire global economy. So let's dive in. First things first, before we can start throwing labels around, we gotta be on the same page. The term tax haven gets used a lot, but what does it actually mean? To figure out if the BVI fits the bill, we need a clear, simple definition to work with. So generally speaking, a tax haven has two key ingredients. Number one, really low or even zero taxes for foreign companies or individuals. And number two, a high level of financial secrecy, which makes it super hard to see who actually owns what. Okay, with that definition in our back pocket, let's look at the evidence. All right, let's start with the argument for calling the BVI a tax haven. When you just look at the surface level facts, the case seems pretty straightforward. It definitely ticks some major boxes based on the definition we just talked about. So, that first ingredient, the tax part? Yeah, that's a pretty compelling argument. For international businesses setting up shop there, there's no corporate tax, no capital gains tax, no inheritance tax. I mean, the list just goes on. If a company isn't physically doing business on the islands, its tax bill is basically zero. That is a massive financial incentive. And then you've got that second ingredient, secrecy or confidentiality. For a long time, the BVI's privacy was a huge selling point. The fact that they didn't disclose who ultimately owns a company, well, that was seen as a major plus for protecting assets. So you've got zero taxes and high confidentiality. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. Now, we've got to look at the other side of the coin. The BVI and its entire financial services industry, they strongly reject that tax haven label. They argue it's totally misleading and that what they offer is something completely different. Instead of tax haven, you'll hear them use the term tax neutral. And here's the core of their argument. They claim they don't help companies avoid taxes altogether, but instead they help them avoid being taxed twice on the same income. The idea is that a company will still have to pay its taxes in whatever country it actually makes its money. The BVI just acts as a neutral middleman that doesn't add another layer of tax on top. And they don't just stop there. The BVI makes the case that it's not some rogue territory operating in the shadows. No, they insist they are a cooperative, compliant player on the world stage, and that they work really hard to meet international standards on transparency and fighting financial crime. And as proof, they point to their beneficial ownership secure search system, which has the great acronym BOSS. This is actually a really big deal. It's a central, secure database that holds verified info on who really owns every single company registered there. And they say this isn't just for show. This information is made available to law enforcement agencies all over the world. In fact, they've highlighted how the BOSS system was crucial in helping enforce sanctions, like the ones against Russian assets. Okay, so we've got two pretty compelling, but totally conflicting stories. On one hand, you have all the classic tax haven features. On the other, you have this argument for a tax-neutral jurisdiction that's committed to compliance. So, what happens when we look at the cold, hard data? This is where things get really fascinating. Let's just let this number sink in for a minute. For every 1,000 adults living in the BVI, there are over 15,000 registered companies. 15,672 to be exact. That number is just staggering. It's really hard to even wrap your head around a ratio like that. And as this chart shows, the BVI isn't just a little ahead of the curve. It's a massive outlier. According to the EU Tax Observatory, it has the world's highest number of registered companies per person, by a long shot. It's not just in the lead, it's playing a completely different game. And this, right here, is why you hear the term shell company so often. It suggests these are just legal entities on paper with no real offices or employees. So what's the consequence of all those so-called shell companies? Well, it leads to something called profit shifting. As you can see here, the BVI is one of the top places in the world for profits per employee. This is a key red flag that suggests companies are legally moving profits they made in high-tax countries to a subsidiary in a zero-tax place like the BVI, even if almost no real business is happening there. All right, we've heard the arguments, we've heard the defense, and now we've seen the data. It's time to bring it all together. What should we make of all this? Is the BVI a tax haven or isn't it? This table really sums up the fundamental tension, doesn't it? The critics see a system with zero tax that's basically designed for tax avoidance and profit shifting. But the BVI's view is that they're a tax-neutral hub that prevents double taxation, that they comply with global standards, and that they actually support jobs and tax revenues in other countries. It's two completely different realities. So ultimately, the answer is, well, it's complicated. The BVI absolutely has clear features of what we'd call a tax haven, like that 0% corporate tax. But it has also taken these really significant steps toward transparency and cooperation that definitely challenge that simple label. It really does exist in a gray area. And that brings us to a final, maybe much bigger question. Perhaps focusing only on the BVI is kind of missing the forest for the trees. The BVI exists because there's this massive global demand from corporations and wealthy people for low tax, private places to put their money. So, is the real problem the supplier, or is it the global financial and legal system that allows and even encourages this kind of demand in the first place? But what's your take on all this? Is the BVI a tax haven, plain and simple? Is it a responsible financial center doing its thing? Or is the truth messy and somewhere in the middle? We would genuinely love to hear your thoughts, so please drop a comment below and let's get a real discussion going. And hey, if this breakdown helped you understand this whole complex topic a little better, do us a huge favor and hit that like button, share it with a friend who might find it interesting, and of course, make sure you're subscribed for more deep dives. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this breakdown. I really hope you found it useful. Until next time, stay curious.